few days ago, Jennette McCurdy released this book, Half His Age. The title is a reference to a relationship she had with a man who was, you guessed it, twice her age. The relationship was messy and problematic, to say the least. This is told in the book in the form of fiction, but Jennette hasn't shied away from real-life comparisons. So I read the book almost in one go. I would say the writing is good, in my opinion. I do think it was written with the marketing of the book in mind, though, which is a phenomenon that I've started to notice more and more in both fiction and non-fiction. You see, you get a set of passages and quotes that are just perfect for social media marketing, like posts or short-form videos. I don't know if it's done on purpose, but it feels like it is. Actually, I know from her social media page that they've been pushing the female rage narrative. Female rage is very present in this book, especially in the second part. In fact, I feel like they really try to anchor this book into the moment in our present culture. You have mentions of Sephora and Shein hauls, hyper-consumerism, social media addiction, to the point where it felt a bit cliche. Other than that, I think that the themes covered in this book had potential, but I'm not sure Jennette gave them enough space to really spark social commentary within the context of the book. She did mention, though, that she wanted this book to start conversations, highlighting that she might not have all the answers to what she wrote, which is perfectly fine. As part of her book promo, Jennette was invited on Call Her Daddy, hosted by Alex Cooper, and she said this.
What types of conversations do you hope your new book will start? The conversations around desire and power?
Well, that's exactly what we are going to do today. There are so many ways to comment on this book. I won't be the only one doing it, but I get to choose which angle I approach it from, and the conversation around desire and power feels very important to me, especially now, and I'll explain why later. But for now, I need to share something super exciting with you and talk to you about our dear sponsor. The thing that I want to share with you is, to say the least, revolutionary. The first collection of silent toys. You heard that right. No more embarrassment that someone overhears you during your me time session. It's all going silent now. The brains at Bellesa created what they call whisper tech. It's somehow delivered an assortment of toys in all shapes that hit all the spots in silence. What? Yes, I know. It's insane how quiet it is. No noise, full power. Of course, I gotta hook you up on this. I'm doing a giveaway with Bellesa, so literally everyone wins a free toy. Now it's time to meet the Whisper Collection, the world's first silent virus. Bellesa's new Whisper Tech makes sure you never need to choose between power and discretion. But before I get into all the details, let me show you the silence that is this collection. Ready? Exactly, you can't hear anything. These things are powerful, but somehow completely quiet, which is amazing if you want maximum privacy while still having fun and experimenting. You can put your pleasure first without waking up the entire house, your roommate, or your partner. The silent toys come in whatever format you prefer, but still in silence. This collection really is something new, that's why I'm hooking you all up. Everyone who signs up wins a free Whisper Vibe or a free Viral Rose toy with any Whisper purchase. Click the link in my description and grab your new toy. Thank you Bellesa for sponsoring the video, and now let's get back to it. So I want to start by making sure we've got our facts and data right before getting into the more abstract notions of desire and power. Age gap relationships are one of those places where those dynamics are especially strong, and they tend to raise a lot of questions, sometimes concern, sometimes fascination. And guess what? I found a really cool study on this, and I want to share it with you. Now, full transparency, it was conducted in France, but French couples, like most couples in globalized countries, have an average age gap of about 2 to 3 years. So even though we live in different places, we're actually way more similar than we think. Basically, what I'm about to say is very likely to apply to you watching this video and to the country you live in. Okay, disclaimer done, let's go. Here's the research article I'm going to talk about. It's from Marie Bergstrom. She's a sociologist, an expert in dating apps and modern love. Now, I have to say I read a lot on those topics. I wrote about it myself in my little essay. And I have to say, I think Bergstrom is one of the most interesting researchers on this. So I really wanted to share her work with you because she needs more recognition. Now, among the many things we tend to take for granted in heterosexual relationships, one of the most persistent is this. Men are usually older than their female partners partners. We see it everywhere, especially in Hollywood. On average, husbands are a few years older than their wives. In Western Europe and the US, the average age gap is 2 to 3 years. In some countries, it's much larger. Because this pattern is so stable and widespread, it has often been treated as something that is almost natural, as if it were written into human biology. Men like younger women, women like older men. Men seek fertility, women seek security. End of the story. Except, it's not that simple. At a time when age gap relationships discourse is literally stronger than ever, and some are opening up about their own stories, it's worth taking a closer look at what sociology actually tells us about age gaps. For decades, sociology and evolutionary psychology dominated explanations of age gap relationships. Researchers like David Boss argued that human mating behavior is shaped by evolution. Men, supposedly wired to maximize reproduction, would naturally prefer young, fertile women. Women, in turn, would seek older, wealthier, more established men who could provide stability and protection. Some call this hypergamy.
Because women are hypergamous, they want males who are of equivalent or higher status than them socially. The same isn't true in reverse.
On paper, it feels like a comforting explanation. It turns a social inequality into a biological destiny. If men are older, it's because everyone is just following their natural drives. Problem is, reality doesn't match that theory. If men were truly obsessed with youth, we would see far more couples with very large age differences. In France, and again very similar in other globalized countries, fewer than 7% of couples have an age gap of 10 years or more. Fewer than 2% exceed 15 years. And the old pattern of women consistently marrying up has largely disappeared. In other words, actual relationships are far more moderate, constrained, and ordinary than evolutionary stories suggest. More importantly, this approach rests on questionable research choices, meaning that couples reflect individual preferences, which is not always the case. We look at who ends up together and assume that's exactly what both people wanted, as if every relationship were the result of a clear, symmetrical choice. You see, it's not because you date a conservative guy that you are into conservative guys. Maybe you thought you could change that guy, and I get you, I've been there myself. Now, sociology challenges this research method. In the 1990s, French sociologist Michel Boson offered a very different interpretation. Now wait for it. He argued that age gaps are not natural, they are part of a gender-power relations. To come to that conclusion, he used surveys where people were asked whether they would accept a younger or older partner. Boson observed something striking. Women, especially young women, strongly rejected the idea of dating a younger man. And men, by contrast, claimed to be very open to older women. His conclusion was that age gap exists because women want them, a form of consented domination. I'm actually preparing a video on Melania Trump as I'm doing this, and this phrase, consented domination, feels quite relevant to her case, even though obviously it's more complex than that. But anyway, he came up with this conclusion, obviously very provocative, and also, is it really true? But here's the catch. These answers asked by Boson were given in abstract, hypothetical situations. People were asked what they would do in theory, not what they actually do when someone shows interest, sends a message, or asks them out. So in a way, we are getting closer to a real, honest life situation, but we're not there yet. That's where dating apps change everything. With dating apps and websites, we are no longer looking at couples after the fact. We can observe who contacts whom, who replies, who doesn't, who gets ignored, who persists. Basically, we see desire in motion. And crucially, we see failure. We see the couples that were not formed, and that's where things get interesting. Sociologist Marie Bergström analyzed hundreds of thousands of profiles and millions of interactions on Mythique, one of France's largest dating platforms, and her findings are revealing. First surprise, men and women's stated age preferences are much closer than stereotypes suggest. Contrary to stereotypes, women are not all dreaming of much older men, and men do not openly declare an obsession with young women. In fact, as people age, both men and women tend to become more open to younger partners. The difference is that this tendency is stronger and more socially legitimized for men. Second surprise, men who claims in surveys to be open are actually far more specific in practice. On dating apps, they overwhelmingly contact younger women, and the older the man gets, the younger the targets tend to be. A man in his 60s is, on average, messaging women significantly younger than him. But when we say younger, we don't mean like 25-year-old, it's relative to their own age. Women, on the other hand, narrow their age range as they age. You can imagine how difficult it was to pronounce this sentence. They tend to look for partners close to their own age, not endlessly older. In other words, as you can see on the graph, the age gap is not the natural meeting of two complementary desires, it is the encounter of two different trajectories. What dating apps really show and surveys, etc. can't show is that relationships are built less on shared preferences than on adjustments. Most people don't end up with their ideal partner. They end up with the person who replies, the one who doesn't ghost them, the one who finds them desirable at the moment they are available. And not everyone has the same bargaining power. Young women can receive a lot of messages. Older men, especially those with social or economic capital, can afford to aim younger. Older women, by contrast, often find themselves in a weaker negotiating position. It's interesting, by the way, how when we look at those inequalities in desirability, we often talk about younger men who are not receiving as many messages, but we don't really talk about 50-plus-year-old women. I think that tells a lot about how society values different individuals. A woman past 50 doesn't make any sense in the eyes of patriarchy, in the eyes of capitalism, so we don't really care if she can't find a partner. However, a young man who can't find a partner, it's an attack on their masculinity, on who they're supposed to be, they can turn violent, etc., etc. But going back to our study, the age gap appears for what it really is, the product of unequal desires and unequal opportunities. Not a pure choice, not a biological destiny, but a social negotiation. One of the most important contributions of this research is showing that male and female desires do not align as neatly as we like to think. Bergstrom shows that age gaps are often the outcome of unrealized desires. So, what does the age gap really reflect? Some say it's related to nature, although that it's about consented domination. In her study, Bergstrom explains that it reflects gender norms and everyday compromises. Dating is a system in which not everyone has the same room to maneuver. And this is perhaps what newer generations, including people like Jennette McCurdy in her new book, are beginning to question. Okay, now we know what the latest science tells us, and I think it's time to finally answer Jennette's question.
What types of conversations do you hope your new book will start? The conversations around desire and power, those are the two areas where I think there's so much to discuss.
Because we haven't really done it yet, I went on that science tangent. In her book, Jennette obviously tackles the men's desire for younger women. That's what we talked about in part 1. The attraction for younger women and age gaps are quite common in Hollywood. They are socially authorized or even sometimes glorified. However, in the last few years, and especially after Me Too, conversations around power imbalances have led to greater shame put on people who engage in age gap relationships. Women have always been criticized or mocked for, having partners that are much younger than them, but now even men are starting to be criticized for it. I would say that Hollywood is slowly catching up to this, but when you look at society in general, and actually I looked at a lot of videos in preparation for this, videos of people, average couples who are in relationships where there is a big age gap. You can tell when they tell their stories, when they present themselves, how the interviewers speak. You can feel there's tension, there's shame in the room. This lifestyle is largely seen as something weird, something that should raise concern. A lot of the average people invited on those shows were socially isolated from their family, from their friends. Their parents didn't understand why they were doing this. The friends were a bit confused and couldn't really connect with the partners. And I think it's in that case where the transgression isn't glamorized, cannot be glamorized, that we really understand what powers those age gap relationships. Since the beginning of the Me Too movement, which started in 2007 with Tarana Burke and gained momentum in 2017, the topic of SA has taken more space in the media, but some argue this has had consequences on the way we view women and their desires. Think about this. In trials of SA, victims can get asked a lot of questions about their S life, which is inappropriate and some countries illegal, but yeah, it happens. People do that because there's this idea that if a woman has an active, unconventional S life, she's less of a victim. There is a good victim and a bad victim, which is obviously wrong. However, as a result of this, some defense lawyers and victims are encouraged to lean into the perfect victim stereotypes, to present a version of womanhood that is modest, asexual, and defenseless. The problem, you guessed it, is that by seeking justice for women, which is an absolutely valid cause, we inadvertently promote the stereotype of the perfect victim who can only be a victim, who cannot be questioned about her S-life orientation or interest. So this is an argument based on a book that I read not too long ago. It's called On Freedom by Maggie Nelson, who's a feminist essayist and a scholar. She, as well as other feminist thinkers, welcome the advances of Me Too, but lament that conversations on the complexity of women's desires have to be put aside to protect female victims. This book, then, Health is Age, and Jennette's feeling that we needed a story of female desire is refreshing in a way, some would even say necessary. You see, a lot of the work that thinkers and academics do eventually trickles down into cultural productions, and Jennette's work is an example of that. It is best understood when we take into account those burgeoning conversations among feminist thinkers. So I mentioned Maggie Nelson, but some of you may be more familiar with Amya Srinivasan or Catherine Angel, or in a different way, Peggy Orenstein. They each wrote about desire in their respective books, which I'm showing on screen right now. They all challenge the limits of mainstream discourse on female desire, specifically its reliance on simplified consent frameworks and victim-perpetrator binaries. Maggie Nelson is especially critical of approaches that reduce S encounters to a yes-no logic. And she's speaking from experience. While she was teaching consent workshops, she noticed that official scripts left no room for the chaotic, powerful nature of female desire. For Nelson, desire is not tidy or easily governed. It is contradictory and deeply entangled with power. She argues that there is no such thing as a pure erotic space. Instead of pretending that power dynamics can be eliminated, Nelson invites us to imagine forms of power that are less coercive and more enabling. She warns that when feminist discourse focuses exclusively on harm, risk, and policing, it risks erasing women's own desire, and with them, sexuality, agency, and complexity. Peggy Orenstein's research on girl sexuality echoes this concern. She documents how girls grow up surrounded by sexual imagery and are encouraged to be desirable, yet are rarely taught to understand or articulate their own pleasure, as education tends to focus on reproduction, risk, and now consent, while leaving desire almost entirely unspoken. As a result, many girls engage in S activity without necessarily enjoying it. Orenstein's book is based on a lot of interviews, and those interviews reveal that some girls feel entitled to have S, in line with cultural narratives of empowerment, but not entitled to center their own pleasure or to ask for reciprocity. S becomes something performed for others rather than experienced for oneself. Catherine Angel adds to this by challenging the expectation that a woman should always know exactly what she wants and express it clearly. Sometimes we just don't know, and contemporary discourse on consent, with its enthusiastic consent imperative, doesn't necessarily account for that. So like Nelson, she recognizes that ambivalence or contradiction are not failures of agency, but ordinary features of S-life. So taken together, these thinkers push back against rigid frameworks that flatten S experiences into binaries of consent or harm. They insist on making space for uncertainty, desire, pleasure, and power, not as problems to be eliminated, but as realities that we have to explore in all their complexity. Now, reading those books and getting familiar with those ideas is important, in my opinion, otherwise I wouldn't be talking about them, but it also asks us to be super open-minded. And I know this can be very tricky, especially when we talk about essay. A lot of us have traumas attached to that, bad experiences, and so thinking about those topics in abstract terms or intellectualizing it feels almost rude at times. I think most of us have been in situations when that uncertainty, that power was used against us. I understand that this can be difficult, and I'm not gonna lie, like making that sort of videos on those topics is always very difficult for me. But ultimately, I think we need those conversations, we need to be able to detach ourselves from those traumas, from those bad experiences, to think about it more clearly and really envision like what sort of society do we want, you know? And in order to do that, we have to remove a bit of that emotional component. We have to remove a bit of the moral, good or bad binaries to really approach this with complexity. I think the complexity is just necessary if we want to find real solutions to this very serious problem. So yeah, that's what we're doing in this video. That's what Jennette wanted to do with her book, or at least like that's the sort of conversation she wanted to trigger. So I'm just obeying to her, you know. In fact, Jennette herself finds it difficult to determine if the harm that this relationship caused was entirely harmful. In some interviews, she said that there's always a lesson to be drawn, but that in that case, she felt she could have been okay without that lesson. In other interviews, she recognizes that she felt things in that relationship that she wouldn't have felt in a more traditional relationship. It's tough, to say the least, I relate to her story in a sense because I've been in that situation twice. The age gap wasn't as dramatic, but the guys were older and involved in relationships. I didn't know that during the first few dates, and once I learned it, I was already attached and as attracted to them. In the first case in particular, it was this very roller coaster type of relationship where I was used, clearly, but it also felt very exciting at times. I felt very depressed and very alive at the same time. Now looking back, I think I was in a bad place and I could have made decisions that I would have definitely regretted. But yeah, I remember what this friend told me. It's the type of friend you only see like once a year or twice a year maybe. So she had been in a long relationship with the same person since her late teenagehood, and they had broken up in a very friendly manner. But when this conversation happened, she was working as an au pair in New York, so she was in a new place, new city, etc., etc. And she told me half jokingly that she was craving toxic relationships. She wanted to feel the highs and lows, and it took me a while to really understand what she meant, because immediately I thought, why would you let yourself be used by men, even if you find a form of pleasure in that? But yeah, those feelings of being used or using the other person, that notion of power, this is a big part of what turns people on, and pretending this isn't a thing is just not realistic. By having those conversations in all their complexity with the right people, we make sure that we give each other space to experience those intense feelings and still feel safe. This goes back to what Nelson wrote in her book on freedom, echoing this idea that safety is a right rather than something women should negotiate at the cost of their own self-discovery. Consent demands of women to know, and to know for sure, to take their safety into their own hands, enthusiastically. But what if you don't know? Catherine Angel asks. What if you want to try? You want to trust? Is there space for you to do that? Is it safe to do that? Can you trust the other person? Why is the burden of safety always put on women? Whether it has to do with how we move in public space or how we engage in privacy. Why can't we trust, be surprised, and discover what we want in the process? We don't get to do that as women. We're told it's not safe, stick to the script, girl, don't put yourself in risky situations, because they might take advantage of you. But why does it have to be my problem? A woman's problem. Now, I do want to circle back to the topic of age gap relationships. Do you remember? That was the topic of the video. I was told that a reality TV show centered on age gap relationships is going to come out soon, or at least this year. So this conversation is not done yet. But yeah, based on what we said in the first part on the science behind age gap relationships, and the second part on desire and power from the female perspective, I'm pretty convinced actually that we have all the material we need to approach cases of age gap relationships in our lives or in the media with the right amount of empathy or concern. Something that I want to keep thinking about, and I'll leave you with that, is the notion of agency, a woman's agency. Recognizing a woman's agency is understanding that she can make her own choices. And I sometimes wonder how much of people's negative reactions to age gap relationships is due to genuine concern, and how much is due to a belief in women's inability to make choices for themselves. It's hard to come up with a clear answer because there are so many environmental factors that may influence the result, the answer. In our case, women are conditioned from an early age to view themselves as inferior to men, as being dependent on men. So when we judge other women's choices, like the choice to date an older man, are we doing this because we are aware of the norms of a patriarchal society, like the tendency for hetero women to want older, financially stable partners, or accept more submissive roles? Or are we doing it because we don't trust women to make their own informed choices? Again, no clear answer. I hope that was still food for thoughts. Those conversations are ultimately still quite new. So if you enjoyed this conversation, I'll put a list of the different books that came out recently on those topics, so you can go and read them. I invite you to share your thoughts in the comment section. I'm really interested in what you think about this. I'm still forming my opinions on this, I think. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe, to leave a like, to hype the content. I think you need to click on like the 3 little dots and then you can hype or something. I don't know. But please do it. Apparently it helps. Don't forget, I also have a Patreon. On Patreon, we have exclusive contents, updates, a Discord chat. We have a lot more book recommendations over there if you're interested in that. Big thank you to my Patreons, and an even greater thank you to top tier Patreons: Jose Bailey, Nofal Shamari, Fred, Hongqing Wang, Paul-Louis Agneau, Patrick Button, Jeff Lee, Yilan, Taya Matin, Nick, Alina, Brandon, Jem Siddle, Patrick Riley, Ojoal, Boris, Ria, Koriji, Tristan, Christopher, Jan, Donage, Alex, Manuel, Christopher France, and Perry. And thank you to the other ones who prefer to stay anonymous. That's it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and yeah, I'll see you very soon. Salut! make sure you remove that from the screen.